Hi, and welcome to another episode of FSW Signals, a podcast from the Institute of Innovative and Emerging Technologies, where we look at the innovative things happening at the college and explore what they might mean about the future that we're shaping together. Today, we're excited to sit down with Rebecca Harris. She's the Assistant Vice President of College-Wide Curriculum and Academic Enhancement, and we're going to explore a big question. What does it mean to learn in a world where access to information is constant and expectations around education are shifting? We'll talk about how learning is evolving, what it means to center students in that process, and what those changes might signal about the future of education at FSW. Rebecca, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a growing sense that what it means to learn is fundamentally changing. From your perspective, what feels most different right now?
Well, I think the elephant in the room, of course, is generative AI and the coming of agentic AI, which are sort of consuming all of the oxygen, I think, right now in education spaces. But already our traditional models were under pressure, and they have been for several decades, whether that's, decreasing budgets or emphasis on workforce education or, sort of a reshifting of priorities around what majors are valuable, student debt. I mean, all these things were sort of coming into the scene and putting education under pressure, putting our traditional model under pressure before generative AI got here. And then generative AI swooped in and kind of gave a shock to the system. And so I think right now we're just sort of in this moment where we're trying to figure out what does it look like when our traditional role as the arbiter of information, as the place where you go to get information, when that traditional role isn't really workable anymore. And so I think that that's one of the things that we're being confronted with. And it obviously started a long time ago. I mean, the internet is as old as I am, which is pretty old. And so, it's not like we haven't known that information was really accessible for a long time. It's just now it's instantaneous in a way. I think that it hasn't been before. And it can be organized and sophisticated in a way that it wasn't necessarily even 5 or 10 years ago. So we have to think about our traditional model and what it's going to look like when we can't rely on the same systems to decide if someone has learned or not, to decide if someone is qualified or not. We're going to have to come up with new ways to measure that sort of thing. And it really is going to, I think, become less and less about what can a student produce to show that they learned something and figuring out how we measure the process of learning. So I think that's kind of the soup that we're cooking in these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, speaking of traditions, and you touched on a lot of this, but for a long time, education is focused on access to information and getting the quote-unquote right answer. How do you think that model is being challenged in light of all this today?
Right. So just like the history of education, especially higher education, and I won't, give a 40-minute lecture on this or anything, but the model really comes from the late Middle Ages, right, where I'm the only guy for 200 miles who has these books, right? So everybody has to come to my spot and, hear me talk about these books. And that's the way we have to learn, right? And really that model of education, while there have been tweaks, there hasn't really been a huge paradigm shift since that time, right? We still go to the teacher's space, the classroom, right? And we listen to what they have to say. And they're the ones who are the keepers of knowledge, right? The producers of knowledge. But now when you can build a bot that talks like Kierkegaard, right? What is the role of the philosophy professor or the history professor or the English professor in that environment? And so I just think we're kind of on a precipice right now as a field, because it's like it could either be a cliff that we fall off of or it could be something that we leap off of, right? So I think that that's really exciting. But that traditional model that assumes a scarcity of information, of me being the only one who possesses it, is just not workable. And it hasn't been workable for a while, but I just think the technological moment that we're in is pushing us in a way that maybe we haven't been pushed before. And I really hope that what we're going to see is sort of revisiting the central question of what is learning for? what are we actually doing here? Is learning for being able to recite a list of English Civil War battles, right? Which I could not do, so don't ask me that. Is it being able to show that you have all of the facts, right? Or is it something else? And I don't necessarily know what that is, right? I mean, I think we're at the sort of beginning of that reframing, but I think, that's sort of what we need to be asking ourselves and really thinking about how to move away from a model that values compliance and into one that really is about engagement and sustaining that engagement, not just in the time that you're in college, which may be one semester, or it may be 6 years, or if you get a PhD, it might be 12 years, right? Not just sustaining that engagement during that time, but throughout your life, right? Because as information becomes more abundant, we're going to need to continue to adapt to find ways to sort of manage the fire hose, right? And that takes discernment and that takes wisdom. And so that is a lifelong process. And I really think that's sort of the question we need to be revolving around is how can we keep people engaged throughout the whole of their lives?
All right. Can I go off script a little bit, you guys?
Absolutely.
All right, good. Because I'm so interested in what you're saying, and you and I have these conversations frequently. So I kind of want to shift a little bit from this idea. There's a signal, I would say, that we're tracking in higher education, which is a shift from, or maybe a shift back to, right? A shift away from product and more toward process, which is very much in line with what you're describing. And sometimes I really want to bring this optimistic, hey, it's about curiosity and fun, as you and I have talked about. It's about meaning and asking questions. How do we do that work together so that there's at least a thread of that and not just always feeling like what we do is under pressure and under fire?
That's a great question. And I don't have obviously a complete answer for that. But I do think one of the things that we all probably liked about school, those of us who, became full-time educators who went on to get graduate degrees, part of one of the things we liked was just sitting down and talking with each other about our stuff, right? And, being the biggest nerd about whatever our thing was, right? Whether it was molecular biology or restoration literature or whatever, we liked sitting in a classroom and thinking about ideas with our peers. And I think that that's something that can help us in this moment as a sort of salve to some of what feels like a never-ending torrent of change, right? That everything is changing all the time. Everything is always unstable. And we don't have any time to just sort of sit down and reflect and talk about the things that made us excited to get into this business in the first place. And so what I want to see is more space for conversations like that. I mean, sort of the professional development model of training is great because we need skills, right? We need to learn how to do new things and use new tools. But I also think moving towards a symposium style discussion where you just come in and Mitch talks about whatever Mitch's nerd thing is, and Anna talks about whatever Anna's nerd thing is, and Becca talks about whatever her nerd thing is. I think that is so healing in a way because it reminds us of the fun thing that got us here in the first place. And I think if you asked anyone, and I have asked a lot of people, almost no one would say, oh, what really got me into my discipline was all the tests I had to take, right? It was all of the ways that I had to check boxes, right? I don't think anyone really says that. I think they say, oh, I read this amazing thing, or I did this experiment, or I was involved in this project. And that's the thing that brought them in. And I think we need to help people get back to that enthusiasm. And it's easy to forget about it because most of our faculty are teaching 15, 18, 21 hours, and they have 200 students, 300 students, and they've got their own personal lives, and the pace of change is so rapid. It's really easy to get sort of swept up in that, and I want to see us create more spaces for just chatting and finding that joy again, because I think that's one of the things that will help us get through this moment.
That's amazing. I think as you're describing it, the word that's coming up for me is nourishing. Learning is nourishing. Connecting with people over the things that are interesting and meaningful to us are nourishing. And how do we bring that experience to students and then also help them develop the skills that matter most right now? And what do you think those skills are?
Well, I think they're two big things, and within both of those things are other small things. So I think the first skill is curiosity. And I know Anna has heard me say this about a million times. I really think curiosity is the next big divide. So between people who are curious and people who are not, because curiosity is what's going to prompt the next big idea, right? This is one of the things I'm always saying to students about AI. It's like, yeah, AI can give you an answer based on what already exists, but it cannot have the next great idea, right? It cannot even figure out, the idea whose time has come, right? It cannot do that kind of intellectual work. And the only way to do that is to remain curious. So I think that's one big skill that's required. And it's maybe weird to refer to curiosity as a skill because I think we think of it as like a personality trait or a habit of mind, and it is those things. But also, it takes practice to stay curious in a world where we're really busy and, we're overwhelmed all the time. It does take a certain sort of tending, like you have to tend to it to remain curious. So I think that's one. And then the other major skill, I think, and probably the one that will be most important in the coming decades, is information literacy, being able to tell what's true from what's false, what's real from what's fake, being able to tell what's credible from what's not. I think that is absolutely going to be crucial. And sort of built within that is discernment, right? Being able to interpret quality in a range of things, right? So discernment, wisdom about what is valuable. I think, all of that kind of gets folded into information literacy. So for me, those are the two big skills, and they're independent of discipline, right? So whether you're a biologist or a mathematician or a computer scientist or a cybersecurity expert or an English major, all of those fields are going to require those two things for people to be successful. And I think that's something that we can build a curriculum around by focusing on how to help our students cultivate and foster those particular habits, those skills.
A word that's coming up as you're talking about this for me that I would kind of fold in there, and I'm not totally sure where yet, is agency. I feel like our digital worlds and social media in particular have helped us cultivate the habits of being passive. And I spoke with someone yesterday who was telling a story to a group about a medical condition, and her doctors were recommending this device implant. And she was just curious about it. Like it was a big promise, and so she was for it, but she wanted to learn more. And as she learned more, her list of concerns grew. And she told them, no, I don't. And they were shocked. You have to do this, whatever. Turns out later there was a scandal or whatever that doctors were getting kickbacks for recommending this device to patients. It really wasn't indicated for her and so on. And we were having a conversation about skills around this. So I said, imagine how much curiosity and agency that required. And somebody who's scrolling through life, I might call it, maybe would have just been like, great, you can make me feel better. Let's go. And so I think, again, that's not really the domain of one discipline in particular. But I think if we can get students really excited about learning, we can also help them nourish that sense of agency. So I love that. So you've been working on everything. I mean, I'm always just so amazed by the work you're doing. But one of the things that I want to ask you about or give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit more about is the Level Up Curiosity Boodlebot. Some of the upcoming faculty development opportunities. Where do you see these fitting into this kind of future that you're shaping?
Well, I think one of the biggest struggles for faculty is time. As I said, most of our faculty are teaching 15, 18, 21 hours of classes. They have, 100 or more students. And so finding the time to totally redesign a class is really difficult. And so something like the Level Up Curiosity Boodlebot that I built is about helping faculty scale that redesign without taking up a huge amount of time. So what I did was I put in, my expertise in the science of teaching and learning, in student-centered pedagogy, in inquiry-based learning, in all those things that foster student agency that that help with intrinsic motivation. I put all of that into the instructions in the bot, right? And what the faculty member would bring is their disciplinary expertise. So the conversation the bot is having is about taking, that knowledge about what works in effective teaching practices and combining it with the faculty's knowledge about biology or chemistry or math or English or history or whatever. So that's why I built that one, because really it helps with scale, right? If I don't have time to sit down and think of 10 new assignments, right, the bot can give me 20 ideas that then I can continue to have a conversation with and build off of, which would help me as a faculty member scale some of my ideas more quickly than if I was doing it all by myself. And sort of the professional development that I've been doing, and I want to shout out to Dr. Matt Vivian and Dr. Katie O'Connor, who are instrumental in my ability to do this and run the Capstone Summer Institute, and Matt and I do the Be Creative series together. Really, that is about putting that student at the center of teaching across disciplines. So, and showing how agency leads to better outputs, right? So when you give students the opportunity to drive the bus, you would be amazed at what they will show you. And that's something in the capstone that we have just seen, is that just giving students the opportunity to work on anything from K-pop to sea turtles to 1970s punk rock, like anything that they're interested in, just gives the most exciting and interesting things. They make interesting things. They have interesting conversations. And I think that's what we all want. And so one of the things that I emphasize in all of the PD is the idea of the showstopper, which I have cribbed from the Great British Bake Off, right? Which is the thing you make at the end of the show that shows off all your creativity, but also shows you have the skill in the discipline, right? So if you have to make a bread sculpture, you have to know how to make bread. But I don't have to quiz you about what is in bread because I can see you've made all the bread to go in this bread sculpture, right? So all of those technical skills are embedded in the showstopper, but the showstopper is what helps student make memories, right? And then that's the thing that they're going to remember in 5 to 10 years. And so that's really what my sort of professional development, faculty development ethos is about, is helping faculty design those experiences for students. And one of the ways that we start that is just by asking faculty, what was a memory for you? What was a showstopper for you? And how can you bring that same vibe to your classroom with our students now, so that, in 5 years when you run into them at the grocery store, they're like, hey, oh my gosh, I remember when we had to build that rocket and whoever got it the highest in the air, got a prize. Or I remember when we all wrote raps about early American culture, right? My students, it was last time I taught early American lit, it was right when Hamilton came out. Nice. And they had a creative project. I got a lot of raps that were awesome. But I also got like a tarot card deck about the founding fathers. And so just like all these interesting creative things, those are the things your students will remember. And that's the thing they'll talk to you about in the grocery store when they run into you 5 years from now. And that's really what, for me, the faculty development that I've been leading is help faculty design those experiences for their students.
So I have an important follow-up. Did someone create a bread sculpture?
No, it was on the Great British Bake Off, okay. One of the earlier seasons, the bread episode. There's always a bread episode. It's usually the third episode. And the challenge was to make a bread sculpture. And the person who won that day had made like a lion, and it had a mane and, all these. And it looked incredible.
But students who are listening could potentially do that as a capstone project.
Absolutely. If you're listening, students, and you want to do your capstone project as a bread sculpture, we would welcome that for sure.
I love it. Well, let me plug that for faculty to get access to Boodlebox. You would go to the OIT page on FSW website and search for Boodlebox, and then there's a form that you fill out, and we faculty are able to get that for no cost. What about the summer faculty development? How would people access that information?
If you go to the website for the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, you'll see the training calendar, and you can register for the Summer Capstone Institute. You'll be at the end of that week. It's a half day throughout that week. At the end of that week, you'll be certified to teach the capstone, and you can be put on the schedule. But also a component of that is using those principles to rethink your disciplinary classes. So it's just a good energy, I think, to bring into your planning for next year. And certainly join Dr. O'Connor and Dr. Vivian for that. They do an excellent job. And then I'll also plug the Learning Assessment Committee is doing an assignment clinic on the afternoon of May 4th, Star Wars Day. And we will be just helping revitalize anything that you feel like might have gotten stale or isn't working for you. Again, all about finding the fun, finding the thing that nourishes you. So bring an assignment, bring your curiosity, even if you are like, I want to throw everything out, right? Come and we'll work with you to come up with some new ideas for your class. And so that's also on the training calendar for the CTLE.
Nice. So we have nerded out in a big way.
Yes, we have.
Mitch,
I love that.
listening in on this academic nerd conversation, do you have a final question you want to throw out there? Or are you just processing it all?
I'm processing a lot. I would like to say if anyone does make a bread sculpture, please alert the marketing department. I will. I think, my closing thought would be that I can tell you're both very excited about all this. It's very excited. And I think you said about, being excited about learning, that's where it all happens. And you're truly, when you can nerd out about something, when you can just.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Yeah. Nobody's here because they love multiple choice tests, right? Nobody's here because they like checking boxes. Everybody's here because they love their nerdy thing and want to share it with other people.
Absolutely. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Signals. You heard it here. We like to have a lot of fun on this show. If you have any ideas of anything you'd like to hear us talk about, please reach out to us with that, and we'd love to chat about it. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.